1183, Syria, Saladin's court. A messenger rushes inside. He has brought grave news. Around 200 crusaders have landed on the coast of the Red Sea near Medina. It seems they wanted to attack the city by surprise and snatch away the body of Prophet ﷺ. They were only a short distance away from their goal.
This is the story of Saladin from Islamic history perspective.
2 years have passed after the victory at Jacob's Ford. There hasn't been any fighting with the Crusaders in the meantime. Saladin used this time to rebuild the strength of the Ayyubid military and the economy of his lands. But in 1182, both Saifuddin and As-Saleh died within a short period of time. The leadership of the Zengids came to someone named Imad al-Din, but many Zengid emirs refused to follow Imad al-Din and started infighting. It was not possible for Saladin to move against the Crusaders on the western border while the Zengids were fighting each other on the eastern border. There was always a chance that some of Saladin's own emirs would rebel, influenced by the Zengids. So Saladin had to make his position stronger in Syria. But this time, he did not march to Aleppo. He went straight to the heartland of the Zengid dynasty, Mosul, where Imad al-Din had his court. On his way, he received the allegiance of many Zengid emirs who decided to join the Ayyubids, seeing Saladin's stronger position. This way, most of the regions of the Zengid Empire came to Saladin's hand by the time he reached Mosul. Saladin then negotiated with Imad al-Din for a new treaty. In this treaty, Imad al-Din promised to give Aleppo to Saladin. Also, Edessa, Haran, and Raqqa came to the Ayyubids. Imad al-Din would still rule Mosul, but he had to promise to help Saladin's mission against the Crusaders. But while Saladin was busy administrating his new lands in Syria, the Crusaders were plotting to take revenge on the Muslims for their defeat at Jacob's Ford. A Crusader lord named Reynold of Chatillon sent around 200 soldiers to Medina from Iraq. They sailed through the Red Sea, destroyed several ships carrying pilgrims to Mecca, and finally landed at a place very close to the Medina, which we saw earlier in this video. Luckily, Muslim soldiers stationed at Medina could stop these attackers before they could do any harm to Prophet ﷺ's final resting place. Saladin was furious. This provocation cannot go unpunished. Saladin brought his army to Iraq to punish Reynold and laid siege on Iraq. But Baldwin IV, who was very ill at this point, still marched out of Jerusalem and moved towards Iraq with the Crusader army. They offered a truce to Saladin. Saladin didn't want to get trapped at Iraq with the enemy at the back, so he accepted the truce. The Crusaders promised not to attack any pilgrims or Muslim holy places in the future. After that, a few years passed by without any big fight with the Crusaders. In the meantime, Baldwin IV died in 1185, and the throne went to his 7-year-old nephew, Baldwin V. He started to rule under the guardianship of another Crusader lord named Guy of Lusignan. But Baldwin V also died in 1186, and the Guy of Lusignan became the king of Jerusalem. When these events were taking place in Jerusalem, Saladin got a letter from Imad al-Din asking for help against the Seljuk Turks. Now the Seljuk Empire was another Muslim empire in the Central Asia. They saw the weak position of the Zengids and decided to attack them. Saladin could not have another threat coming from the east while he was busy with the Crusaders in the west. So again, he marched to Mosul to protect it against the Seljuks. A new treaty was signed with Imad al-Din, who agreed to give up his leadership of the Zengids and to become an emir of the Ayyubid Empire. With this treaty, the Zengid Empire officially came to an end. Saladin fortified the defense of Mosul and its nearby regions, so the Seljuks did not continue with their plan to attack these places anymore. Now the whole Mesopotamia, except Baghdad, was under Ayyubid rule. But the Crusaders were not sitting idle while Saladin was busy with the Seljuk Turks in the east. Reynold attacked a pilgrim caravan to Mecca and slaughtered the pilgrims. This time the whole of Egypt, Syria, Arabia and Yemen was under total control of Saladin. so there was no issue to bother him during his campaign against the Crusaders. Saladin called all his emirs from every corner of the Ayyubid Empire to come with all their forces to join him against the Crusaders, and they came upon receiving the order. In April of 1187, the Muslims started to gather at the border of the Crusader lands. Not all of the soldiers were there yet. The Crusaders wanted to use this situation to stop the Muslims from advancing. So a few hundred knights from the Templars and the Hospitallers gathered to attack the Muslims by surprise. Initially, the Muslim soldiers panicked, but soon they decided to fight back. The Muslims were around 5,000 to 6,000 at that point, so they could easily defeat the Crusader knights. All of the knights except 4 were killed during the fight. This boosted the Muslim morale even more. In June of 1187, Saladin marched into the Crusader lands with almost 30,000 soldiers. The Crusaders gathered almost 20,000 troops to face the Muslims. They camped near a place called Safuria. The Muslims were on the western bank of the Sea of Galilee. Between the two armies were 30 kilometers of arid lands with scarce water supply. Neither army wanted to march through this land during the hot summer days, as this difficult march would significantly weaken the strength of the troops. To avoid the march, Saladin put a clever plan in motion. He sent some of his troops to attack a nearby town called Tiberias. In that town, the family of an important Crusader lord, Raymond of Tripoli, was staying at that point. Count Raymond was with the Crusader army in Safuria. When the Muslims surrounded Tiberias, Count Raymond convinced the Crusaders to march to Tiberias to rescue his family, and thus the Crusaders fell into Saladin's trap. On 3rd of July 1187, the Crusaders started marching towards the Muslim camp in the morning. In front of the line were the troops of Raymond of Tripoli. In the middle was King Guy, and the rest of the army was at the back. In the middle of each group were the cavalry surrounded by infantry and archers on all sides. As the temperature started to rise up during the midday, the Muslim light cavalry started to harass the Crusaders. They started to throw arrows on the Crusaders from far. So the Crusaders were forced to keep their iron helmet and iron armor on even under the hot sun. On that day, the Crusaders marched almost 17 kilometers. At the end of the day, they were completely exhausted. But even during the night, Muslims continued throwing arrows at the Crusader camp. So the Crusaders could not even take rest. It was also difficult for the Muslims because of the summer heat, but they had lighter armor and they controlled all the water supplies in the area. So the Muslims were in a better position. The next day, the Crusaders continued their march. Besides constantly throwing arrows, the Muslims also started a fire on the bushes along the road. The smoke and heat from the fire made the situation of the Crusaders even worse. They had almost no energy anymore. The spirit of the whole army broke down. At the front of the line, Count Raymond decided to charge the Muslims with his troops before it was too late. But the rest of the army was not aware of his decision. Raymond and his troops charged a Muslim battalion under one of Saladin's generals, Taqi al-Din. With a clever move, Taqi al-Din ordered his troops to split in 2 parts, and Raymond and his soldiers passed right through them before they could stop. Now they were cut off from the rest of the Crusader army. Either they had to turn back to fight the Muslims, or they could move forward to flee the battlefield. Raymond decided to flee. With Raymond and his troops gone, the Crusaders became desperate. They moved to a plain named Hattin and gathered there on higher ground to try and launch an attack against the Muslims. They already understood that it would not be possible for them to win the fight by 1-to-1 battles. So they concentrated all of their force only to kill Saladin. After the midday of July 4th, the whole Crusader cavalry adorned with heavy armor charged the Muslims downhill towards Saladin's location. The fighting was intense. There were lots of casualties, but the Muslims won the fight. The Crusaders had to retreat. As the hours passed, thirst and exhaustion pushed the Crusaders to their last limit. They charged the Muslims again and again. They were crushed by the Muslims. The Muslims were determined to see the fight to the end. So before the sun set, the Muslims charged the Crusaders valiantly. The already weakened Crusader defense line got smashed by the wave of Muslim attack. Finally, the Crusaders surrendered. King Guy was imprisoned, but Saladin treated him with respect. However, no mercy was given to Reynald. He was beheaded by Saladin himself for his atrocities against innocent Muslim Hajj pilgrims. And with that, there was no Crusader force left in the Holy Lands to stop Saladin from liberating Jerusalem. Finally, the long-cherished dream of Saladin was about to become a reality. So, stay tuned.